this whole season. Everything that we've had here has just been a little bit strange and a little bit out of the ordinary. You know, Kelsey and I, my wife, we shared our first wedding anniversary on Monday this week. We had amazing plans for our wedding anniversary. We were going to go skydiving. Could you imagine just getting up on that plane, jumping out, having that free falling sensation, just that pure sense of freedom? But it's not what we got. We were far from freedom. In fact, we were stuck at home, which is definitely not what we expected. You know, the one question that people keep asking me in this time is, Adam, have you gone crazy? Like, is this making you go crazy? And I want to do a massive shout out to all the extroverts out there, because guys, this is some of the most difficult things that we will ever have to deal with, being locked up at home, not being able to see people, not being able to go out and say hi to our friends. But also another massive shout out to the introverts out there, because you're stuck at home probably with an extrovert or two, and there can't be anything worse than that for you guys as well. So there's no doubt that lockdown is a little bit average. We don't enjoy being at home, not being able to do anything that we want. And you know, throughout the week this week, there was this one Bible character that kept popping up in my head, like we said before, Jonah. And the reason that he kept popping up was I was kind of jealous of him. I almost wanted to be like Jonah. I was secretly dreaming that I could do what this character does and do a complete 180 and just go away from everything. Not have to think about all these restrictions again and go back to the world where you can hang out with friends, you can give people a high five or a hug, and it can just be good fun. If you haven't heard the story of Jonah before, I'm just going to take you through it right now. So grab a seat, relax in, and we're going to cover the whole story. Jonah is one of the minor prophets that we read about in the Bible. He pops up twice in different books. He pops up in 2 Kings and also in the book of Jonah. See, this is a bit of an interesting book, because unlike the other books of prophets, where it's often about words of a prophet, words that God has given to this prophet, this book is a story about a prophet. It's the story of Jonah. The story starts when God tells Jonah to go and preach against evil in this place called Nineveh. You see, Jonah did not want to go to this place. This was a bad, bad place. At the time, it was the capital city of the Assyrian Empire, Israel's sworn enemies. And to put that into a modern day perspective, the place where Nineveh is, literally modern day Nineveh during the 2010s, was the headquarters for ISIL. So it's definitely not a place that you want to frequent. So when Jonah was told he had to do this, instead of going east towards Nineveh, did a complete 180 and went the exact opposite way as far as he could go. He hopped on a ship and he was off to a place called Tarshish. He went below deck and had a cheeky nap while they were on the ship. And you see, at this stage, God sends a massive storm, and we are talking about a storm of biblical proportions. Things were going absolutely crazy. And as these things were getting crazier and crazier, the pagan sailors on the ship thought that, geez, only something divine could be doing this. Only something divine could be behind all of this that's happening. So they confronted Jonah. They asked him, are you a religious guy? Is this happening because of you? Jonah got up and he explained that, yeah, in fact, he does worship the God who made the land and the sea. And the sailors asked him, you know, what should we do in this situation? And Jonah replied by simply saying, well, throw me overboard. Which might seem like something really noble for Jonah to do, might seem like the best thing that he can do, until you realize that this possibly is one of the most selfish things that he could have done. What better way to avoid going to Nineveh than by dying with his blood on the innocent sailors' hands? So these sailors are initially reluctant for doing this, and even while they're throwing him overboard, they end up repenting to God. They end up worshipping the God of Israel out of this whole situation. And you see, God essentially foils Jonah's plan as well once he's been thrown overboard. You see, instead of Jonah being able to escape everything going on, instead of him being able to go far away and possibly even die, he ends up getting swallowed by a great big fish. And while inside this big fish, he thinks, I think it's time I have a chat to God. I think it's time we sort this out. So he has a quick prayer. And though He doesn't technically apologize in this prayer. He doesn't technically say sorry or repent. He does thank God for not abandoning him. And he promises to obey God from now on. You see, God's response to this is just the fish vomiting Jonah up, letting him get back to dry land, and again commissioning Jonah to go and to preach in Nineveh. And this time, Jonah goes. He starts making his way to Nineveh, which we're told is a massive city that could take several days to walk through. And after just one day in, he stops and he shares his message. He shares his sermon, which is 40 more days and Nineveh will be overturned. 40 more days and Nineveh will be overturned, which in Hebrew is actually only 5 words. I reckon that's a pretty strange sermon. It's not the average sermon that you would hear on a Sunday night. It's super short. It doesn't even mention the current situation that's going on, how they should respond, what action points they should take, and there's no mention of God. I reckon that's a pretty strange sermon. It's making me think, is Jonah trying to tank his own sermon? Is he purposely trying to share an average message so that people can't get God or can't receive God or feel God or experience God in a new and powerful way? The funny thing is, regardless of whether Jonah did it on purpose or not, the message worked. But not exactly the way that Jonah had hoped for. You see, the city had been overturned, but not overturned in a way of being destroyed or overthrown, but rather being changed or transformed. You see, the king of Nineveh and the entire city and even the cows started to repent. This is the second time in this story that we see pagans, people who don't worship God, don't follow God, be more responsive to God than one of God's prophets. Chapter 4 opens up with Jonah essentially chucking a hissy fit in prayer form. He explains that he didn't want to go to Nineveh just because it was a bad place or a dangerous place, but he in fact didn't want to go because he knows that God is compassionate and merciful, and that he knew that God would forgive them. You see, he closes his prayer by saying, God, I can't deal with that. Just kill me. Just get it over with. You see, Jonah would rather die than live with a God who forgives his enemies. God responds not by killing him, but by asking him, Jonah, is your anger justified? Jonah leaves and goes and sits on a nearby hill to wait and to watch over Nineveh. And he's waiting to see just what might happen. Maybe they didn't properly repent. Maybe they'll go back on their promise. Maybe they'll get roasted after all. And while Jonah's sitting here, God sends a plant to grow and to give Jonah shade. Jonah starts to love this plant, that he doesn't have to sit there in the hot and burning sun. But God also sends a worm, which slowly starts eating away at the plant, and eventually it shrivels up and dies. You see, this frustrates Jonah. He had grown to really, really like this plant. He'd grown to really, really appreciate what it had done for him. And in this boiling hot, sunny day, Jonah again prays to God and again asks him, just end it all. I'm over this. This isn't what I signed up for. So God again asks Jonah, is your anger justified? Absolutely, he says, just let me die. Those were Jonah's last words in his own book. But it's not how the book concludes. The book concludes with God explaining that this whole vine and plant thing, this whole gimmick that God's essentially done, was to show Jonah that even though Jonah could get all concerned and emotional about a plant that he only knew, that he only enjoyed for one day, shouldn't God be like that with people? Aren't humans more valuable than plants? Isn't it okay if God feels some kind of emotion and concern for the people of Nineveh, regardless of what they've done? And that's how the book ends. God asking Jonah essentially for permission to love his enemies. What a strange, strange story. What a strange, strange book. Sure, we can read it and pick up a few really great nuggets of wisdom. It's important that we listen to God. We should love our enemies. If you fall overboard, try and get swallowed up by a large fish because maybe you'll live. But I think the real interesting thing is if we look at Jonah and we look at this book as a whole, You see, the story is kind of like a satire. It's a bit of a comedy. It's a bit of a joke. You see, it's the kind of story that you would expect to see in a sitcom. If Big Bang Theory ran for another series, I'm sure that Sheldon and Leonard would have ended up inside of a big fish. You see, this story puts characters in extreme circumstances. It uses humor and irony to reveal their stupidity and their character flaws. You see, you've got the powerful king, the powerful pagan king who humbles himself. You've got the pagan sailors who repent. You've even got cows who repent for what they've done. And then you've got Jonah, the prophet who rebels. Like I said before, usually the books about prophets are words that God has given them and them sharing it with people rather than being about Jonah. And the thing that stands out from this for me is that God can work through people who are flawed. You see, for me to just run away and ignore the current situation would be super, super selfish. You see, if we look at ourselves and we realize that, we might be flawed. We might be broken or see ourselves as dumb or stupid or ugly or weak or flawed or incapable or even useless. But you see, God chooses to use us anyway. You see, even in some crazy situations like Jonah's scene, even in those extreme circumstances, in the book of Jonah, there's the one overarching message. Are you okay with God loving your enemies? You see, I reckon if God can work through me, if he can love me in my flaws, I reckon I should be okay with God loving my enemies. Thank you so much for joining us for Shift Live tonight. You're about to head into online small groups with your leaders. Make sure you filled on that online registration form. We'd love to have you here, and we'll catch you next time. See you later.